Chris Gethard is a comedian. He's a podcaster. Beautiful Anonymous is really, it goes beyond the moth and into areas of personal connection like few podcasts do. It's a real reflection on Chris's values. He's had several stand-up specials. He performs regularly at the Comedy Cellar. Hey, Chris, welcome. Welcome back to The Gist.
Oh, it's a joy. Every time I get to talk to you, I remember that you're just a truly gifted conversationalist. And I'm not trying to blow smoke, but I tell you, I get a lot of credit with Beautiful Anonymous, and you are one of the people I point to as somebody where I'm like, well, you want to see somebody in action who knows how to just have a conversation, go check out Pesca, man. So it's good to talk to you again.
Thanks, man. So I want to talk to you about your stand-up mostly, because I have talked to you mostly in the past about Beautiful Anonymous and about the Chris Gethard show, which I think will one day be remembered by future civilizations as a high watermark for comedy, creativity, and chaos. But I saw a special that you put together a couple years ago, the idea being that you've now spent half your life doing stand-up. Where do you probably aren't so precise with the taxonomy, but of all your comedy endeavors, where would you rank the importance of stand-up to you?
It's really hard to say. I struggle with my relationship with stand-up, if I'm being honest, because I don't think it's the thing I'm best at, but it's probably the thing I get the most gratification from in some ways. Like I started as an improviser and that came very naturally to me. And I became really well known in that world, both as a performer and a teacher for many years. My TV show, there's nothing else like it. That was unique to me. No one can touch that. Like, I'm not saying that it ever lit the world on fire numbers wise, but as far as that vibe, we nailed something, you know?
Right. And no one could ever say, hey, let's do another Chris Gethard show, because it's only, there's no such thing. It's all just based on the vagaries of insight as to the human condition plus funniness that only Chris Gethard has.
And that I don't think I could do anymore because I'm not mentally ill in the same way as I was when I created the show. This is not to say that I don't have problems today, but I go, it is a real reflection of a very motivated, very creative person who is at a very specific place in time.
Like needing that. Are you saying needing that to get by and get through?
In some ways, yeah. And if you cracked open my brain back then, when I was still dealing with so much self-loathing, so much self-doubt, so much of this feeling that I had to prove something to somebody, that's what comes out. And you have to also mix that with a New York City that still had real estate that could, where punk bands could go and like live in a squat together and 4 bands could run a performance venue in Bushwick, and where comedy and music could cross over in those ways. You look at it now and you go, the theater I came out of, UCV, now has corporate ownership. You look at the music spaces that all the bands that used to play my show came out of, they don't exist anymore. They've all been turned into other types of real estate. And then you think of the Manhattan Neighborhood Network and Public Access, where we walked in and went, oh, this is a place where we can kind of build this TV studio and invite all the corners of the music and comedy world of New York in that era to treat this as an outpost for them. None of those things exist anymore, let alone the fact that the things that do exist now, like Twitch and Discord and all these things, are clearly where we would try to execute those ideas. So it was of its time. Point being, those things probably define me more, but stand-up, I think, has always been the most challenging to me. I'm not the best at it. I'm nobody's favorite stand-up. I am a lot of people's second or third favorite stand-up. But in many ways, it's actually been the most fascinating to me because it is the most difficult and is the most challenging, and that came least naturally to me out of all the things I've done.
So are you like the XTC of stand-up? Or am I degraded? There's someone out there who likes XTC more than Smiths, I guess.
I love the way your brain goes. But I mean, it's probably not a coincidence that like I come from a musical background where I'm like, cool, everybody has discovered Jawbreaker, but how come everybody's not listening to Jay Church? The drummer from Jawbreaker was also the drummer for Jay Church for a while, and they were all roommates together. How come Jay Church never blew up the same as Jawbreaker? Like, that's always been my mentality, and I've realized there's some level of self-sabotage where I always sort of land as that type of artist.
Yeah.
And there's probably something intentional about that, even though I bang my head against the wall, wondering sometimes how I've come so close to more mainstream success so many times. And I sit there and I go, and yet I keep landing in the same exact slot that all the artists I love the most land in, which is being the maybe slightly more countercultural thing that's right next to the mainstream success. I've landed right there so many times. So I have to sit there and realize, like, it's always what I loved the most, and it's where I keep landing. Maybe some of that is not, I wouldn't say intentional, but subconsciously landing where I'm landing where clearly a zone I've always liked. I grew up on WFMU radio. I grew up watching the Uncle Floyd show. I grew up watching things that were sort of very weird and very cool, but never mainstream. You know, the music I listen to fits that as well. So I sit here in my 40s and I go, yeah, makes sense to me that I've always wound up very close to mainstream success, but maybe just off the edge of that game board.
So when you had parts on big shows and well-acclaimed shows and shows that were really good, like Parks and Rec or The Office, was your attitude, well, let's do this spot and let's not be against it. I'm not selling out. I'm not doing some shitty sitcom. But do you think your attitude was less gung-ho than maybe, I don't know, your management team or even other people who were writing that show and wanted more success, more, I'm not going to say mainstream, more conventional success for Chris Gethard than Chris Gethard did?
Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of... My manager has stuck with me for many, many years. And you actually, you know each other from before entertainment stuff. So you know, he really, really good guy. And I've been with him, I think since 2007 or 2008 now. And a big part of why is my manager is the only guy ever on my team who, when I wanted to do public access television a year after my sitcom got canceled, he was like, awesome. Sounds like the new Uncle Floyd show. Go for it. Love that shit. Yeah. I have confused so many agents over the years. So many people who have told me now is the exact time to move to Los Angeles. I once had an agent tell me, you sort of have 4 different cult fan bases, and if we could just get them all in the same room at the same time, you'd be one of my biggest acts. How come
that's
we can't
interesting? What were the 4? The improv?
The Beautiful Anonymous fan base, the Gethard Show fan base, the fans who know me through the things like Broad City and The Office and Parks and Rec as a character actor. At any given point, you know, Mike Birbiglia's movie is taking off and I'm on This American Life a few times. Like at any given point I've had, and you know, it has slowed down in recent years, but when I was at my biggest and when I was at my most thriving, it was very clear. Oh, the Beautiful Anonymous fans don't watch the Chris Gethard show. The Chris Gethard show fans don't love my stand-up. The fans of my stand-up aren't necessarily into the books I'm writing. Like they were all sort of like separate but equal underground fan bases where even I couldn't get them all in one. I was aware of all of them and they were all helping me pay my bills. And even I couldn't come up with the thing. I mean, certain episodes of the Gethard show, I think Career Suicide, my HBO special, brought a lot of those fan bases together under one roof for the same time. And I just did not manage to further that momentum. And that was a point where the big turning point I look at now that has kind of put me at where I'm at these days is when Career Suicide came out, my manager did tell me it is time to end the Chris Gethard show. You should not be working for True TV when you're getting all this critical praise from HBO and NPR and all this. It's time to now go jump on it and become like, you could be punk rock Birbiglia if you just put your foot on that gas right now, which would be a lovely career. And Mike has been a mentor to me. And I said, I know. And he said, but that being said, I also know that your wife is on the show, that you have friends who met through the Chris Gethard show who have babies now, that this is literally something that exists between friendship and job and family to you in a lot of these cases. And that last year of doing the Gethard show was probably a massive mistake momentum wise. But what am I going to do? I built it, and I have a sense of ethics that told me you take this one over the finish line, and you don't, there's close to, on any given shoot week, 100 people have their jobs because of this thing. I'm going to take 100 people's jobs away because I have a chance to go be the punk rock Mike Birbiglia. Like, it's just not who I am. So sometimes I look back at the past 24 years of doing comedy and go, sometimes I have maybe held on to being like Mr. Punk rock a little too much, or trying to be a little bit, what would Ian MacKaye do? What would Ian MacKaye do right now? And go, I'm the only one who cares. And sometimes I have sabotaged in that way, and it has hurt me. And in other ways, I'm actually immensely proud of it, because there's comedians out there who can make fun of my act. And there's people who have made me feel a little unwelcome in the scene. And that's fine based on the fact that I'm a little strange or that my act is not the standard. But what nobody can ever question is that I've done things my own way with a sense of ethics that have guided me. And, if I'm speaking frankly, a lot of the people who have spoken ill of me in a way that rattled me, when I take a step back, I look at it and I go, I don't see any sense of ethics. All I see with a lot of those people is chase the trend toward the money. Mm-hmm. And maybe I haven't made as much money as I could in the past 24 years, but I've never fallen prey to that idea that you just chase a trend, especially if it's a really negative trend.
Are there stand-ups that are close to the model of what might have been? Like, I think of, I don't know if he's punk rock, he might be alt, but I think of Patton Oswalt, not sacrificing in terms of the quality of the creative work, and even a lot of the side projects that are definitely not making money for him. Like, he's this like Patreon supporter of a podcast I love called Valley Heat. That's just one that comes to mind. And then, or you could even take it like, well, maybe you could have redefined what stand-up is. Hannah Gadsby did that. Maybe your stand-up could have been a very sui generis thing. I don't know. Was that ever a consideration?
Yeah, and I also want to be clear too, when I'm like, nobody can question my ethics, I'm not the only one. Kyle Kinane is out there. Maria Bamford is out. I mean, so many people down the line. Also, comedians actively working in clubs right now who draw real lines on what they're willing to participate in, what their goals are. A lot of people out there, but so I'm not trying to claim that I'm some like lone samurai wandering through the desert in like, a kung fu style loneliness. Right. Like, there are others out there, and I'm very inspired by them. But I do think that in general, entertainment probably rewards the hot hand and rewards the trends more than it rewards someone who says, hey, I want to work with you, but there's certain things I'm willing to do and not willing to do. And there's certain ways I want to do stuff. And we all might make a little less money, but I want to avoid Ticketmaster fees. I want to avoid certain venues. I want to, especially as I'm getting older, I sit here, I go, this idea that someone comes out and they might need to get a babysitter, and they might need to pay for parking and meals and drinks, and times are really hard right now, and they're setting aside a night, and this might be their only date night this month. Is there any way? And they thought they bought a $20 ticket, but after all the fees, it's $43. That to me is messed up. You don't do that, let alone what you don't do. And I'm not trying to talk shit about any of my peers right here, but I sit here and I go, the fact that sometimes people pay all this money, and we're also in a current climate that's like, and you might have the camera pointed at you so someone can get their crowd work bit and make fun of you. Might have just spent $350 on a night where you thought you were spending under $200, and this might be your only date night this month. And you might show up on the comedian's TikTok because they might choose to make fun of your job while you're sitting there in front of your wife right now, panicking about how to react. And they might get a reaction shot of you eating shit because you're getting crushed for the TikTok algorithm. I just sit there, I go, I got zero desire to participate in that. It feels mean to the hardworking people who need to laugh and are trying to spend their money to have a night away from their problems. And I just have no interest in it. So I don't know. I'm rambling. Yeah. You get the good rambles out of me.
When you do crowd work, I have seen you say, don't worry, don't be afraid. I'm not going to make fun of you. I'm not that kind of comedian.
Yeah, I actively have to remind people now. It's very cliche for comedians to complain about the current state of crowd work driven comedy driving things, but I can say I'm not the only one out here who goes, it is affecting ticket sales for a lot of us in a very negative way. Anytime someone goes to a market and gets in a fight with their audience member and posts it on TikTok, it might give them a little adrenaline, but what it does is it attracts more of that aggro energy for their audience. But a lot of other people in that room that night probably go, the next time we have a date night, let's go see a movie or let's go see a band, because the band is not going to make fun of us and put it on TikTok. It's a weird thing that only exists in comedy that has proven very lucrative in the sense that it's a dopamine kick on social media. The clips can go really big. They have made certain people famous. And God bless them. I'm never mad at anybody for paying their checks. But I will say, I'll just be blunt and say, I think I attract an audience that's known for being a little bit smart. And I think smart people right now might be a little too smart to treat that as a date night. It's a really aggressive environment to walk into. And we've spent a couple of years training ticket buying audiences that that's what comedy is right now.
Right.
There's a lot of smart people that go, I don't think comedy's for me anymore. And that bums me out. That bums me out because I lived through not one, but a couple golden ages where I saw all sorts of comedians start to really do creative stuff that brought in all sorts of people into the audiences. Hipsters and music audiences and working class audiences and tourist audiences all mixing together in the same rooms in New York City to watch bills where sometimes you could go see certain shows where you'd see the best club comedians and really, really weird alt comedians sharing the same bills because there's a mutual respect for the creativity behind all of it. I don't feel like that's there as much the past couple of years. And just on a personal level, it bums me out. There's a lot of people doing really well. I love social media for the lack of gatekeepers. I love it for the fact that it allows people to self-create. If there's anybody who's self-created a career, it's me. And I love it for that. But the fact that so much of it leans towards this stuff that's based on aggression and antagonism, that to me has a short-term benefit and long-term, man, well, who's coming? The people buying tickets are people who want to get in these situations. And those are people who strike me as off kilter or aggressive in certain ways that I just don't need to be around.
But at the same time, as someone with the soul and background as an improviser, there can be great energy to the unexpected. Now, as a professional, it's not always unexpected when you engage in crowd work. A lot of the times it's just which poor sap is the target of floating punchline, and the best one gets put on YouTube Reels. But so how do you, if you don't want to do certainly mean crowd work, but you still want to hold open the possibility of the unexpected, even in your comedy shows, how do you cultivate that?
I think a lot of it is a contract with the audience, right? Of remembering that this is at the end of the day a service industry, and that anyone who buys a ticket to be in the room, you are there to provide them. They do not exist as fodder for you. That if we're playing within that parameters, that this is all in the spirit of a good show and perhaps a magical night for the people who chose to show up and give you some of their hard-earned cash to be entertained. I think as long as it plays within that parameters, you're good. But we all know right now, the past couple of years, the cameras have been pointing out at the crowd as much as they're pointing at the comedian on stage. And, not to be too blunt, but I've had situations. I had a special, the Half My Life special, where a woman wound up getting on stage and wrestling me on stage like that. I'm sitting here saying I'm not anti-crowd work. I'm saying I think there's a long difference between someone going, yelling stuff and me being able to go, oh, and it actually turns into the fact that your dad's a wrestling coach and you'll get up and demonstrate wrestling moves.
And to be clear, this was no Andy Kaufman bit, and she probably fairly beat you, right? Would you say?
She took me down. She got me in a cow catcher. The move was like some version of a cow catcher, and she really took me out, and it hurt. It hurt, but it wasn't a plant. But it was all playful, and she was cheered for it at the end, and then the show moved on. And to me, that's just a lot different than, not trying to be an asshole, but I sit there and go, how many times do I need to sign on TikTok and see a male comedian calling an audience member a cunt before we all go, whether or not this has anything to do with kindness, we should all start talking about its relationship with hackiness. And we should all start taking a deep breath about the ticket sales for all of us. Because guess what? You call somebody a cunt, they're never buying a ticket to a comedy show again. Neither is whoever came with them that night. And neither are 20% of the people in that room who go, I'm so thankful that wasn't me. They're never buying a ticket to a comedy show again. But congratulations, you went viral on TikTok, you know?
Yeah. So this is real devil's advocate, but for a certain kind of comedian who is good at improv, and this is what the algorithms are rewarding. In other words, this is sort of a dismissive way of saying this is what comedy has become. So at one point you might decry, oh, I have to cut an album now. Well, that was the definition of comedy. Now it's kind of the definition of comedy is doing crowd work and sometimes showing up the audience. But if the audience member themselves seem like it's all in good fun and there's no evidence that that is making people in general sour on comedy, I wonder about the tension between pursuing a free-flowing and not inhibited form of art versus coming down and being censorious and saying this is the bad way to do your art.
It's not bad. I want to be clear. And thank you for drawing that line because, again, make your money, pay your rent. I don't care. I'm not mad at the comedians so much as I am mad at the infrastructure. That it's the cheap adrenaline rush that really, really works on platforms. And the platforms reward it more than anything, you know? And I actually know a lot of younger comedians who busted out with some stuff along those lines, who I've talked to, who have said, and now I go on the road and I want to do the hour I work really hard on and people keep yelling shit at me because I established myself as that. Now, that being said, I'm also sitting here complaining in a way that's really cliche. I've been a beneficiary of other trends that have annoyed the shit out of comedians. This is just a trend, but it's one that I think is particularly overwhelming in its quickness and its widespread nature and the severity to which it affects ticket sales. Like, you can talk to any agent right now who will tell you going on national television on a late night show, Fallon, Colbert, Seth Meyers, does not sell nearly as many tickets as a TikTok clip can, as an Instagram reel can. And that is such a gear shift. So it's head spinning. That being said, there was a long stretch where it was like, take a show to the Edinburgh Comedy Festival and make it really emo and in touch with your emotions and more of a one-person show that doesn't have as many jokes. I directly did that in 2016, and that show wound up on HBO. And guess what? Comedians were so mad about the Edinburghification of comedy. You used to hear that phrase a lot. I used to take shit for it. You're one of these Edinburgh guys now, Gethard. We didn't think you were ever going to be one of these Edinburgh people out there fucking... You're going to go just do a show with no jokes, crying into your fucking Guinness like the rest of these fucking Brits crying into their pints. Like, everybody was mad at that. There was a long stretch where it was, hey, if you want to get a TV job, you got to be an improv person. I directly benefited from that. That annoyed the shit out of the stand-up world. The amount of press that the UCB theater was getting back then was so annoying to so many hardworking comedians. So while this current trend is annoying me and I'm not directly benefiting from it, again, I want to say all the people who are benefiting to it, more power to you. Just let's also think long-term, you know, let's just also think long-term.
Do you think when those annoyed comedians, when the pendulum shifted, they were a little too punitive in their attitudes towards others who enjoyed a pendulum shift in the other direction at one point?
I think there's probably some revenge. There's probably some revenge on the sensitive folks right now. I think you're correct on that. So wait,
this is your whole life is the story. It's just life is a cycle of being bullied and then having a moment in the sun when we have sympathy for the bullies and then being bullied again. And you probably see it playing out not just on a personal and professional level, but a national level.
Yeah. I'll also say this too. I think some of this was constructed. You started to realize around, and again, like, you know, movements that were really powerful, but think about comedy's relationship with the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. You started to see that think pieces about comedy in general got a ton of clicks. And I actually get very upset on behalf of all comedians. I mean, I can mostly speak as like a Northeastern New York scene comedian. There was an article that came out years ago that basically presupposed, hey, you're either an alt comedian or a club comedian, and they fucking hate each other. So pick a side, both as a comedian and an audience member. Which one do you like more? And it was from a very influential publication that has done a lot of good for comedians. But I read it and I went, that is not fucking true.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's sitting around going, we hate the club guys in the alt
Was it
rooms.
Side Splitter? Was it that one?
It was after. It was. I believe it was Vulture.
Okay, yeah.
I believe it was Vulture. But I read that and I was like, that's not fucking true. People of a certain level don't give a shit about this. If you want to go be an alt person, if you can sell tickets and fill the room up and make people laugh, club guys want to jump on the good alt shows, and alt people who get good enough doing their weirdo stuff. Like, you can go see Aziz Ansari and Dimitri Martin drop in at the Cellar from time to time now. They started as alt guys, but they realized those stages are fucking awesome. Let's do them. Used to do shows at UCB where you'd see Louis C.K. on the show. You'd see Colin Quinn on the show. These are guys who were viewed as definitive club guys, but a hot room is a hot room. And an audience that's appreciative of good shit is an audience that's appreciative of good shit. And some of those think pieces also fueled this division, which I think also leads to this real punitive attack style. Inhabit your corner of the world and talk shit about the other corners of the world. That's not good for anybody long term. Now, short term, it might be really good for people, right? To be the hot hand that's the biggest shit talking, that creates the most drama, that gets the most clicks. But long term, this is not healthy. And it bums me out. It bums me out.
And since you're so well aware of how these battles played out in different music scenes over time, I don't know, there must have been a part of you saying, we're really going through this again. We're not learning anything about post-punk, CBGB, television and the Talking Heads versus the Ramones. We're not learning anything from that.
Who sold out, who didn't. It's like every time you start to see any type of artistic scene become a little bit eating its own tail.
Yeah.
And a little, sniffing its own farts. And, when you now see podcasts where comedians talk shit about each other on podcasts, and then other podcasters start dissecting the shit talk from those podcasts, and there's entire YouTube channels that now dissect comedian shit talk between podcasts, I go, anytime you've seen an artistic movement start to sniff its own farts this religiously, it eventually fucking bottoms out. It becomes a bummer. So, yeah, I don't know. But here's Gethard complaining about the state of comedy again for the fucking 10,000th time.
Well, I do want to ask you this a couple times in the conversation. You said something that I've never asked you about, but you've talked about it. Shane Gillis was bounced from SNL or disinvited to be on, and he had you didn't ask for it, but I think in the original reporting on this, there was references to him calling Chris Gethard extremely nasty things, and I don't know. I never heard the tapes. He expunged the tapes. And at one point he said something like, if I really offended anyone, or maybe it was more like, oh, if I really offended anyone, I'll apologize. They should reach out to me. And you did. What did you hope to get out of that?
There's more to it than that. First of all, I'll say this. Shane and I have talked it out a number of times, and he's also fucking crushing it right now. He's one of the biggest comedians of the world right now. So if there was ever a world that was like Shane Gillis versus Chris Gethard, like, he's won that war. He let me know, it was more layers to that. Like, basically I found out that he and I were managed by the same company, and people had been like texting me jokes. And I was like, wait, if you manage them too, this is not a joke. We got to like deal with this. It's not cool, but right. like I'm willing to let it roll off my back. But if you manage him, are you texting him jokes about me at the same time? Like, no. You got to slice through it. And he called me the day after all that came out. He was like, dude, like, as soon as I got to New York, it was actually very touching in a way, because there were a bunch of comedians that turned to him and they were like, hey man, like, Gethard's act is a little weird and it's a little soft. But he told me, Dan Soder was someone that he's really close with, who was like, I don't really get like picking on Gethard, man. Like, and I've thanked Dan for that. And I don't want to air out Dan too much or put them in any sort of weird beef or set their fans off. But like, a few comedians in New York were like, hey man, like, his act is not like ours. He tells 10-minute long stories. He does weird shit on public access. But anytime that dude's ever gotten any success, he tries to give like 5 other New York comedians their first writing job. So what's wrong with that? And a lot of people stepped up on my behalf, and Shane actually reached out to me immediately and was like, dude, I was fucking like your HBO special. There were even a couple things that made me giggle. Like he went off on me for about half an hour in that original audio.
Yeah.
Which was hard to listen to half an hour of getting shitted on. Like, but I can laugh when he's like, man, this guy does comedy for like girls sitting cross-legged on rugs. What is this? And I'm like, I can laugh at that. I can understand that I am not your traditional, the image of a brick wall behind me in a smoky room with a shot glass on the stool. That's not me. I can laugh at that. And he and I talked it out, and we've actually shaken hands, you know, a couple times now, run into each other at the Comedy Cellar. We had one tense conversation there. But one of the things that, you know, I was able to say was like, you've let me know that you regret it. You know, he's like, I shouldn't have been shitting on another comic. And as soon as I moved to New York, other people were like, dude, stop trying to make fun of Gethard. Like, he's a pretty good guy, does his own thing, doesn't bother anybody. Like, people stepped up and told him that.
Yeah.
The problem is that it, you know, if I'm being honest, still get people, and it will happen from him being brought up here. Fans of his are now going to tweet at me and call me homophobic names. They're going to call me a crybaby. They're all this stuff. And they're going to use really harsh language, internet language from anonymous accounts. And I sit here and I go, ooh, to me, this is like the type of thing that just, I'm in this one, but separating myself from it, it bums me out. This culture of comedian versus comedian shit talk to get ahead. This culture of say something 10 years ago, and even if you don't stand by it anymore, fans who maybe found the audio 3 months ago are still going to get a lot of glee out of shitting on me. And I'm not trying to be a baby about it, but I sit here, I go, there's just times where I'm home and I'm like trying to like wrap up work so I can go play with my 5-year-old son. And then right before I wrap up work, I see a Twitter notification that's just someone calling me a homophobic name because Shane cracked open that door however many years ago. And I think he would probably be bummed to hear that. And it was funny, like what people don't know, and his fans come at me. What people don't realize is I'm like, there is a code of ethics that I stand by. And I think being an artist and being a comedian in particular, there's certain rules that I was always taught you play by. And I actually play by them more than the people who have talked shit about me play by them. The New York Times reached out for me for a comment about Shane. And if you go and read it, I was just like, man, you know, he and I have talked about it. So I don't really have any interest in continuing some sort of fight. And if anything, I just hope young comedians realize they don't need to just like obsessively record and release stuff in their younger days. Cause I think that's what bit him in the ass here. And he texted me immediately and was like, you could have made my life worse and you chose not to. And the New York Times was giving you free range to get revenge on me and you chose not to. Thanks for that, man. I'm like, yeah, no problem, dude. What people don't realize is there were a couple times where I texted him because we had exchanged numbers and talked on the phone where I texted him and said, how are you holding up, man? This seems brutal. Mm-hmm. And even though I'm pissed that I got dragged into it, since we were talking, how are you? And he was able to go like, hey, thanks for sending that. Not many people are sending stuff that basic. Everybody wants the fucking gossip right now.
Yeah.
And I sit here and I
So
go,
it takes the emo guy. It takes the emo guy to see through it all.
Well, listen, here's the other thing.
So with a little sensitivity, maybe.
I also sit here, I go, yeah, I'm a sensitive guy and I'm an emo guy, but ask anybody who's known me long enough. I'm also a pretty fucking angry dude from North Jersey who had to learn how to defend myself along the way. Like it's, again, right. Like
the milieu of guy that you grew up with and Shane's growing up in Pennsylvania are, you know, as close in the DNA chart, closer than the human and the chimp, I would say. Have
a mutual friend who once said to me, you are both sort of like weird Northeastern Irish Catholics who have a lot of fucking feelings tied up in that upbringing. And you guys would actually be best friends if your relationship, you guys probably would be really, really tight if your relationship didn't start with one of you just talking shit about the other publicly, right. You know, like, so to me, again, it's just a bummer. It's just a bummer, you know, and not to be, I don't know. I don't want to say anything too melodramatic, but I sit here, I go, the idea of like dissing each other for personal gain, really the only an analog is hip hop. Yeah. And you sit there and you go, sure, like it's exciting, but like it has long-term damaging effects, you know, like it has long-term damaging effects. Like it's not great. And I'm not saying anybody's going to get fucking shot in the streets because they're talking shit about each other on podcasts. I'm not an idiot. I'm not trying to be that dramatic, but I will just say cultures don't thrive through behavior that's rooted in let's all snipe at each other. Like that's the thing. And you know, it's funny because Shane and I talked it out, but there's some other, it became a little bit of a trend. There were a few other people in the wake of that who chose to take some pot shots at me.
So like other lesser comedians who couldn't say to themselves, I'm having so much success, or success is the best revenge, or why even mire myself in this because I'm doing so well. That's the sort of maybe comedian who still latches onto it.
I don't even know them well enough to know, you know, and it only happened a handful of times. But what I started to realize was, oh, there's a there's a culture supporting this more than jokes. And I would actually sit there and say, all these things, they're also the same type of people that tend to like gatekeep on who's a quote unquote real comedian or not. Mm-hmm. Is an Edinburgh comedian less of a comedian than a Comedy Cellar comedian? Well, I'm both. Right. I've been passed at the Cellar longer than some of you shit talkers have done comedy, period. You know, like I'm both. I've done both. The best people from all those areas will tell you that none of this shit matters and shut up. And I sit here and I go, in the same way that, like, you know, if somebody gets to a joke first, you're not supposed to make that joke, even if you got a sick joke on that topic. I play by that rule. You're allowed to talk shit at a bar or at the Cellar table or in the green room, but don't talk shit publicly about other comedians. You affect their fucking money. You affect their rent. You affect their mortgage. You affect their ability to feed their fucking kids. Shut up. That's part of the code. There's all sorts of rules that I would say, if you look at my career, I have faithfully played by the rules my culture taught me. And the people who had things to say about me not being a quote unquote real comedian were the ones breaking those exact standards. Like, I don't give a shit, man. Like, I'm not trying to sound like a tough guy, but there's a bit of a magician's code to this comedy thing. I played by those rules and I always have. And then I got put in the crosshairs of some people who'd like to say I wasn't a real comedian. Well, guess what, motherfucker? You, in doing this, are, in my opinion, breaking all the unwritten codes that we have with each other. You know what I mean?
What's the enforcement mechanism?
Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff that's supposed to happen behind closed doors and a lot of self-regulation in the comedy world that everybody realized they could make money by making it podcasted and TikTok and making it like an addictive, almost in the same way that wrestling fans, there's a certain type of very nerdy wrestling fan. And I grew up a very nerdy wrestling fan. I still love wrestling, but we all know there's certain people that like to watch the matches and there's certain people that like to hear, oh, hey, this guy's beefing with this guy backstage. And that's why they're on a tag team now instead of having the Intercontinental title. And they're as addicted to the talk of what Dave Meltzer's writing about in the dirt sheets. That's as fun for them as the actual wrestling. Right? Comedy successfully kept a lot of that shit behind closed doors. It does bum me out that I arbitrarily became the guy that some people put in the crosshairs as those things were changing, you know, as we started to expose the behind the scenes type of conversation. But anybody at the Comedy Cellar table wants to say my special was too emo and didn't have enough punchlines. Sure, say it there. But when it starts going public, to me, that violates the rule. And it's also like, I built an audience that's very loyal and very into what I do. And again, the other thing I want to stress, Mike, is just to remind all the internet commenters, you brought it up. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not.
Oh yeah, I did. That's on me.
No, and it's not even, I'm not mad at you about it, but I sit here, I go, it's one of the things I've said to Shane was like, when we met each other in person, it was kind of tense. And I was like, you just got to realize, man, like you've apologized to me. We can shake hands, but like, I don't think we're ever going to be buddies because your only real effect on my life is that people who think bullying is like online bullies who like you point their fucking things at me. And 99% of the time I can brush it off. And then, like I said, every once in a while, I'm about to go pick up my son. And on the drive there, I'm like, why did this fucking shithead just tweet this dickheadish thing at me? And to his credit, Shane has been like, yeah, no, that sucks. That sucks. That people hearing audio from many years ago are tweeting at you today about it in a way that just gives you a bummer day, that sucks, you know?
But this is what I'm wondering. If there is the code and if there is the comedy equivalent of not breaking kayfabe, shouldn't there or wouldn't there be, if the code was very much ingrained in the way that comedy is done, wouldn't there be an enforcement mechanism? Like, I think about when unwritten codes are broken in sports or baseball or something has to happen. Some guy gets a pitch in the ear, or we just saw some nonsense with college football, but these are the unwritten codes and then people get put in place. But maybe what you were saying before, that the new way of comedy, the lack of gatekeeping does certainly allow for a lot of expression and more people to be found. But, you know, some benefits of the gate is that these are the sorts of things that are kept.
In some sense, yeah. In some sense. And you also realize too, people got to pay their rent. Just like I said.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, I think some of this shit hurt my ticket sales. And that's fucked up. I have a kid.
Yeah.
Some of this shit talk. I used to go to different towns and I have built my own audience, but I also used to just get comedy fans too. Certain percentage that were just like, cool, this guy's passed at the Comedy Cellar, I'll go. I think less of those people buy tickets for me now. These dickheads who have talked shit about me affected my ability to feed my fucking kid. Fuck you. Like, I'm mad about that, you know, and I've never really had a chance to say that publicly, but there's truth to it. That being said, I think there's also, you know, you start to realize, again, there was this really weird shift in culture and technology where between podcasts and then algorithmic driven video platforms, you started to see a massive and immediate financial reward for participating in it. And I do think there's a lot of younger comedians who got ahead via those platforms, and I love that. There are younger comedians who took some shortcuts, and I worry about that.
Yeah.
There are some veteran comedians who I think probably knew they were giving away a little bit of what you were indicating they just give away culturally, and them I have a problem with, let alone the fact that a lot of these conversations start to feel like photocopies of photocopies, you know?
And to head off a critique, maybe someone hearing this will say, well, if Chris is complaining about ticket sales, what he has to go out and kill. You do a different kind of comedy. We've said it a bunch of times. And it's probably, if you had 45 minutes of literally killer material where you wrest the laughs out of someone and it's all involuntary laughter, that's maybe possible for that sort of comedian to become the Drake to whoever else is Kendrick. But you're doing something collaborative. You're doing something that relies on something like good faith. What I'm saying is, it seems to me you're doing something a little more fragile, right? And that's fine. There's all sorts of art that relies on the goodwill of the audience. And so maybe you're more susceptible to some sort of aerial assault than the, 150 jokes in 45 minutes and taking no prisoners type comedian.
I also like those comedians. I like them. I also like them. And I'm friends with, like, that's the thing it's the thing that's just so silly is like there's a comedian out of Denver named Zach Reinert, does one-liners, short stuff. He's one of my favorite comedians I've ever seen. I think he's brilliant. More people should know his name, like, love him. There's club comics who I admire. I think the best at any given point, the best comic in America is probably a club comic with a club background. And I think it's silly to say otherwise, That being said, there's a lot of great alt comics too. Like the best of the best in all corners. The people who are the best doing the most interesting things should rise to the top. And the tribalism, the division, it's all been fueled by factors that have nothing to do with actual creativity. And that bums me out.
Do you think the current ascendance of roasting as a dominant form of comedy has deleterious effects?
I think you can look at where things are at right now and you can see the development of the roast battle as maybe a canary in the coal mine for this aggressive stuff. That being said, again, just to be self-contradictory, there are people who talk shit about roasts and roast battles. You will not find a larger admirer of roast style comedy than me. I think roasts are fucking hilarious. There are other people who think I'm insane for saying that, and they're like, it's just bullying. I'm like, you look at the history of a roast, and when a roast is done right, and I think they are brilliant. I think some of the shit that was said to Tom Brady to his face, particularly by Nikki Glaser, I'm like, God damn, Nikki Glaser has the biggest balls out of anybody I know.
Yeah.
I admire the shit out of it when it's done well, you know? I think the thing about roast battle that I look back on that I have just some concerns about from a cultural sense, that I think even some of the people who organize roast battle would probably say like, yeah, no, it's a problem, is you go, there's some comedians who are young comedians who the first time you ever saw them was them getting torn to fucking shreds as the loser of a roast battle to hundreds of thousands of views, where you go, ooh, that's a young comic who knew the opportunity was there and felt like they had to take the opportunity. And I know they're good. I've seen them in other contexts where they're really good, and they're probably a couple years away from being great, but this feels like a big opportunity. So you take it. And now 200,000 people on YouTube know you as the person who got your shit rocked on a roast battle. That's probably not great for them. And it probably came to be a little dominant in its time. But that being said, I got no problem with roasts or roast battles, but it was one of the early things that you started to see algorithms really, really reward. And a lot of people started really rushing into that void. And that's I think a little bit of what worries me, Mike, is like, outside of me getting sucked into any of these culture, comedy, war, silliness things, whatever they are, I go, a young comic getting crushed. I bet there's some people who quit comedy, but at the end of the day, they probably just weren't built for a roast battle.
Right.
And that's a bummer that they felt like it was a thing that needed to be done because that's a huge opportunity. Like that, the lack of versatility there, or the feeling of, I have to do this even though I know it's not right, like that does bum me out. That being said, again, I'm not an idiot, and I'm not anybody who likes to sit here and go, Gethard's emo and complains. No, I've been around the scene fucking forever. You also look at like Dina Hashem, who I think is a great comic, who I can quote her roast battle jokes because they were so good. And that was clearly the right choice for Dina Hashem, you know?
Right.
So I see all sides of it, and I try to be well-rounded, but the way that an algorithm just threw such a massive amount of gasoline on those roast battle fires, yeah, that's probably a thing I can look at and go, again, not the style of comedy, not the comedians, but to sit here and go, do these platforms have the best interests of creativity in mind?
Right. That's how I think of it too. If what's driving the attention is the quality of the comedy, and it's subjective, but if a lot of people would laugh at that and that's what's getting the attention, that's fine. That's more than fine. That's what comedy is. But if what's getting the attention is the phrase, watch this guy get destroyed, either watch this heckler get destroyed or watch whoever the poor sap who gets in Dina Hashem's crosshairs get destroyed, that's probably not a good thing for your profession and the art in general.
I'll also say too, and I won't name names, although if you're a comedy fan, a lot of people will know who I'm talking about. But I'm not someone who names names. But there was a comedian years ago who used to post videos of him, quote unquote, destroying hecklers. And when I tell you comedians used to bitch about it and go, these videos get huge views, but he's just baiting hecklers. And then he gets to edit where it starts. And then he looks like this conquering hero. People bitched about it for years, with one guy in particular who kind of made it his thing. And I don't name names because I'm not a shit talker like these people. But I will say, comedians know exactly who I'm talking about, and how many of them are doing the exact same thing when they all called it hacky 10, 15 years ago. Maybe he was just ahead of the goddamn curve.
Right. What is your relationship with jokes? Jokes.
It's a great question because I don't really tell them, but man, do I love them. I'm much more of a storyteller. Definitely have had stretches where, when the emo stuff was the trend, I was coasting. I loved it. So again, all my bitching, I know, well, this is also a trend that doesn't benefit you personally, Gethard. Touche. Well said. A fair point. I love jokes. I think jokes are incredible. I wish I was better at just writing straight jokes. If I could be Anthony Jeselnik, seems awesome. One of my best friends in comedy is Martin Urbano Jr. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Like a fascinating joke teller who writes hard jokes. Great. Love him. I remember when I was crossing over from improv and I started doing some storytelling stuff. Storytelling is easier than stand-up because the expectations are different. And if it's advertised as storytelling, an audience will sit and hear the exposition and accepts the beginning, middle, and end. When you start trying to tell stories on stand-up, and I started getting invited to do stand-up shows because I was already so established in the improv world and then telling these stories, you start to realize, oh no, the pace of stand-up is just so relentlessly different that a story that can crush at a storytelling night bombs at a stand-up night because they perceive it as a lack of punchlines. You got to figure out how to get as much of the exposition out of the way with your jokes. You got to figure out how to not necessarily depend on a beginning and middle and end because this audience might just be too drunk for a beginning, middle, and end. Can you
or
tell
if there's a
story?
choice between poignancy and poeticism versus punchline, you got to go for punchline.
Poignancy and poeticism mean very little to me. And anyone who watched Career Suicide would be shocked by that. This is a special I did a few years ago. More than a few now, coming up on 8 years since it's been on HBO. So I'm rambling about the past in cliche, bitter old comedian fashion. But I remember watching Mike Birbiglia do My Girlfriend's Boyfriend. And I had been trying stand-up and it was very hit or miss for my first few years. And my ego was really tough because I was a king shit improviser at an era when improv was sort of the apex of professional opportunity. There was a stretch where if you wanted to get writing gigs and acting gigs, don't do stand-up, go do improv. All those kids are the ones cleaning up on it. And I was the king of that world, but stand-up felt more fascinating to me and I was bombing. So I had this weird couple of years where I could go do a Sunday night show at UCB where I'd be keeping up on stage with Amy Poehler, Seth Meyers, Jason Sudeikis, Jack McBrayer, the writing staff of Conan, and could keep up with them neck and neck as an improviser. Praying I didn't drown, but could do it on a Sunday night. And then I'd be going and doing a stand-up night on a Tuesday and bombing for 6 people in the East Village because I'm trying to tell a full story. And I'm going, why won't they focus on if I don't do this? It was when I watched My Girlfriend's Boyfriend that I started to realize, if you watch Birbiglia tell stories, it is punchline to punchline. We could get nerdy and talk about that all day, but I would just say, watch the best storytellers, whether that's Mike Birbiglia, whether that's Roy Wood Jr., whether that's Gary Goldman. A lot of the people I like best who tell stories, people who really have mastered it at a level that's comedic, the exposition is solved by the punchlines. The beginning and middle and end are generally delivered via punchlines, or sometimes when you start to really analyze it, not even included because punchlines outweigh the need for the beginning, middle, and end. There are some storytellers who are really, really good in a comedy context where if you start to think about the logic of their stories, you go, wait, I don't totally even understand. If I was telling that story, you couldn't do it that way. Right. They're leaving out information that feels necessary for a story because their punchlines give you so much. So I started learning
Gary
to emulate
Goldman
them.
online at Trader Joe's, I think, is like that.
You look at this one's not as much a story. Gary has this really brilliant ability to do these sort of theoretical long story bits.
Yes.
And obviously many people, I think one of the best things was when he went on Conan and did the state abbreviation.
Right.
bit. And people point to that as, oh, they let him do this one super long bit where he's just telling the story of how hard it must have been for these nerds to come up with the state abbreviations. They thought it was going to be easy, but it was hard. But if you actually go back and watch that bit, how much of it is actually his characterization of the sassy secretary who keeps coming in and out of the room?
Trixie,
how much of it is the tangent about how they'd recently invented the omelet station?
Right.
There's so many funny things about that bit that aren't the state abbreviation. And I would argue, I've never picked Gary's brain about this, though he and I are friends. I would argue that the omelet station and the characters coming in and out of the room to say sassy things. Dot, I believe her name is, if I remember the bit correctly.
I thought it might be Dot. That makes sense. I thought
Is
it
it
was
Dot
Trixie,
or
but
Peg?
I think you're right. Yeah. With
Whichever
the hair.
one. You sit there, you go, oh, right. When I tell people this guy had this amazing bit about state abbreviations, when they go and watch it, God damn, does it have all these funny parts that have nothing to do with that, you know? John Mulaney, one of my favorite stories ever was the Salt and Pepper, the story of John and his friend playing the one Tom Jones song on the jukebox to the point where everybody goes nuts. And then the real brilliant part is when his friend switched it to the other, right? Did they switch it to What's New Pussycat? I forget which one they kept playing and which one they switched it to. But when you go back and listen to it, you go, oh, it's sure it has a beginning and a middle and an end, but you go punchline to punchline on stage. I'd keep using that phrase. I know it might not be the most clear, but another aspect too is it works in reverse. When you go to write a book, many comedians, and I've run into this, you go to include stuff where you go, oh, I got this material that's actually crushing and it ties into what I'm writing about. And any editor worth their salt will go, you're just transcribing your stand-up bit here. And you go, oh, I thought I hid that. How'd you know? And you go, well, you're floating from punchline to punchline. The story doesn't make much sense. You're writing now. It's a different medium. We need to understand the characters, the backstory, the motivation, how you get from point A to point B. That can no longer just be solved by your magician's trick, the punchline. Point being, this question was just, what's your relationship with jokes? My answer, I love jokes. Jokes allow the emo stuff to survive. I have probably been an idiot at times because I go, even right now, my set has a story that's probably close to 15 minutes long. And if I'm being honest, most of that 15-minute exists to get me to one callback. But to me, there are people who will criticize me at times and go, the guy's got no punchlines. And I go, I promise you, I think really hard about punchlines. And when I go to me, part of what's so fun about doing this is how long can I keep them engaged? And is the one punchline going to be big enough tonight to justify, like, is that one punchline going to put their jaws on the floor and justify 10 minutes of this rather grim story that's actually more unsettling than funny? So the internet shit talkers would be shocked to hear it, but like, I've thought about that too, guys.
It didn't just happen.
It doesn't play great on TikTok, but in the room, I get standing ovations for it sometimes. And I care more about the room than the clip. I'm sorry.
So here's the last, and it's going to seem like a non sequitur maybe from the rest of the conversation, which I really enjoyed following where it flowed. But I did have two questions I wanted to ask, and I'm going to jettison one and just ask this one question. It was about a real life story that you told in Half My Life, the special that marked your 20th year in comedy. And it was about a guy you knew in high school having sex with a couch. Now, since the time, and then that was taped in 2019, 2020?
Yeah.
Yeah. So since that time, it has come out that our current or our soon-to-be vice president, depending on when
been ahead of my time, Mike. You know
is
this.
said to have had sex with a couch. Now, the thing is, he didn't. It was all a lie. And I noticed that the number one defense of him was, how dare you? He never really did have sex with a couch. Yeah, do you think that was unfairly couch positive, sex positive, that no one got into the defense of? And what if he did have sex with a couch?
What if he was just a teen exploring his body, much like my high school friend?
And you know J.D. Vance was a chubby, bullied teen?
I'm also still friends with him, and we've never discussed that.
Not JD, your friend.
It's not JD.
Yes.
It is not. I also am friend. The showrunner of my old TV show happens to also be named JD. That was not There's not some mix up where I accidentally floated it out there and they mixed up the JD. No one. This is a friend of mine from way back. But I also say too, Mike, you look back, I was ahead of couch fucking as a trend. I was ahead. You look at when I've made my ass eating joke on my first album, and it was way ahead of when ass eating became an internet meme.
It's true.
I've always been ahead of my time. You look at my public access show and it predates. I would argue that streaming culture, if my show had existed when streaming culture was the thing, we would be here. This Therapy Gecko, who I really like his stuff, he told me he watched my stuff growing up. I'm like, yes, take the ball and run with it in the streaming world. Look how well you can do. I've always been ahead of my time, and couch fucking yet another of the many things where I was just 3 or 4 years ahead of the curve.
You're maybe both the Brian Eno and the Talking Heads of comedy. I don't know.
I'm the Brian Eno of couch fucking and the Talking Heads of ass eating. Let's say that.
That's it. Put it on the next poster. Chris
Put it on
Gethard
my
plays.
tombstone.
Chris, thank you so much.
Sorry I bitched and moaned so much, Mike.
No, that was,
bring it out of me.
I'm glad. That's what I'm here for. It was beautiful. Not anonymous, but we got there. Yeah, my other big question was, and this is a quick one, just for bonus sakes. What percentage of your shirts have horizontal stripes?
Less than they used to. Around 2012, 2013, 2014. I remember where I was. I was at this weird combo comedy computer hacking event.
Oh.
And one of the computer hackers had on this great striped shirt, and I asked him where he got it. He said, J. Crew. And I went and bought every striped shirt J. Crew put out from like 2013 to 2015. And they still populate my wardrobe, but as they die out and get holes, I no longer replace them with striped shirts.
To me, they speak, I know there's a zigzag. They're a little too Charlie Brownish. Not yours, just in general.
I mean, mine, the comparison is fair. I'm a large-headed sad boy who wears shirts with horizontal stripes.
With you, I think it's more of a Cobain striped shirt thing, even though he was appropriating the Charlie Brown.
A lot of people would actually say that with my little hair flip in the front, that I looked a little bit too much like a grown-up Calvin from Calvin. I used to see that comment. Why are you dressing like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes?
When you play Europe, is the reference to Tintin?
Tintin, it is. I get Tintin in Europe. I get Calvin in the States. Very astute.
Chris, thanks so much. That was great. Obviously, it always is.
Thank you. You're the best.